You know, some stories from history aren't just stories. They're more like a blueprint, a masterclass that shows you exactly how power really works in the modern world. And the story we're diving into today, it's one of the best examples out there. It reveals a fundamental truth about how you win, not just a battle, but how you shape the world we're all living in right now.
So let me ask you something. When you think of power, what do you see? Maybe a single hero, right? One person against all odds? Well, I want you to forget that image for a minute. Instead, I want you to picture a power so huge, so overwhelming, that it can literally rewrite the rules of war right from the sky. That's what this is all about. That moment when one side looked up and realized they weren't just fighting an army, they were fighting an entire industrial civilization.
All right, let's set the scene. It's December 1944. The war in Europe, for all intents and purposes, looks like it's in its final act. The Allies are pushing from the west, the Soviets from the east. But Hitler, he's got one last, desperate, all-or-nothing card to play. It's a secret, massive offensive, right through the Ardennes forest. The codename was Watch on the Rhine, but its goal was simple: a single knockout blow to shatter the Allied armies and force them to the negotiating table.
So, on December 15th, hidden by darkness and a truly brutal winter storm, German forces just pour into position. And then, at 5:30 the next morning, the world just explodes. Imagine 1,600 artillery pieces all opening fire at once for 90 minutes straight. The American lines, mostly held by green troops or tired vets sent to what was supposed to be a quiet area, they were completely, totally blindsided. They didn't just bend, they broke. The surprise was absolute.
You have to understand the mindset of the German soldiers at this moment. Their morale was through the roof. Propaganda had hammered it into them. This was Germany's destiny. They believed the Americans were soft, just a nation of consumers who would absolutely crumble under the pressure of a real, ideologically driven attack. And you know what? For the first few days, it really looked like they were right.
All of this chaos, this huge German push, it was all funneling towards a few key spots. And the most critical one, the real prize, was this little Belgian town called Bastogne. Why? Because it was a crossroads, a hub where 7 major roads all came together. It was the linchpin. If the Germans could take Bastogne, they could effectively cut the arteries of the entire American supply system, starving the front lines. The war was suddenly all about this one small town.
And the German advance was just unbelievably fast. Just as they planned, their Panzer Division swarmed around Bastogne, cutting it off, rushed into the town, arriving just hours ahead of the Germans, were the American 101st Airborne Division, the famous Screaming Eagles. They were exhausted, they were not equipped for this kind of freezing cold, but they made it. And just like that, the trap snapped shut.
The situation was, well, it was grim. Just look at the numbers. Inside the town, you've got about 22,000 Americans, the 101st, and a few other units that got caught with them. Surrounding them, roughly 54,000 German soldiers. They're outnumbered more than 2 to 1, completely cut off and totally encircled. For the Germans, this was a dream come true.
And inside that pocket, things were falling apart, hour by hour. Some of the big guns had just a handful of shells left. Food was gone, men were dying from wounds that would have been survivable, but the medical supplies, the plasma, the bandages, it was all used up. And on top of everything, the temperature just plummeted to -10°C, and the sky was completely socked in by this thick, freezing fog. That meant no air support, zero. They were completely on their own.
So on December 22nd, the German command, absolutely convinced they had this in the bag, sent a formal party under a white flag. They delivered a typed ultimatum. It was actually polite, but the message was just brutal. It basically said, look, you guys are finished. We're offering you an honorable surrender. You have 2 hours, or we will begin total annihilation. The Germans genuinely thought they were being merciful.
This demand gets handed to the acting commander of the 101st, a brigadier general named Anthony McAuliffe. I mean, think about it. You're outgunned, you're starving, you're freezing, you're surrounded. The German offer seems logical, maybe even inevitable. But what McAuliffe said next? Well, it would go down as one of the most famous replies in the history of warfare.
That's it. That was the official, typed response. One word: nuts. The American officer who delivered it back to the Germans had to actually explain what it meant. He told the confused German officer, in plain English, it's the same as go to hell. It was an answer so defiant, so American, that it just completely broke the script the Germans thought they were following.
Back at German headquarters, they were just baffled. The German general in charge was reportedly stunned. In his world, a world of military doctrine and cold logic, this wasn't bravery, it was insanity. They had them surrounded, no supplies could get in. This was tactical madness. And right there, that's when the Germans made their fatal mistake. They still believed the old rules of siege warfare applied.
And then, on the morning of December 23rd, something happened. Something the Germans hadn't seen for over a week. The sun came out. The fog just vanished. The skies turned crystal clear. For the Americans freezing in their foxholes, it felt like a miracle. For the Germans surrounding them, it was the beginning of the end.
I want you to try and imagine you're a German soldier in a foxhole looking up. Around noon, you hear this low hum that just gets louder and louder until it's a deafening roar. One observer from a German division put his binoculars to his eyes and saw something that just shattered his entire understanding of the war. He's quoted as saying, "My God, the sky, it's full of them." He wasn't talking about a few planes. He was talking about an armada. 241 C-47 transport planes. And they weren't scattered. They were flying in perfect, disciplined waves, low at just 1,000 feet. This was not a desperate last-ditch effort. This was routine. This was a flawlessly executed operation. German anti-aircraft guns opened up, but the planes just flew straight through it all, like an unstoppable river in the sky.
And as the planes dropped their cargo, the sky just erupted in a storm of colored parachutes. And it wasn't random, it was a code. Red parachutes carried ammunition, blue meant medical supplies, plasma, surgical gear, yellow was food. Every single color was a specific solution to a specific problem, being delivered right in front of the enemy's eyes. It was the entire American industrial machine made visible as a rainbow of salvation.
As if that wasn't demoralizing enough for the Germans, the clear skies brought something far, far worse. P-47 Thunderbolts. For a solid week, German tanks and trucks had owned the daylight. Not anymore. The Thunderbolts came screaming in low, guns blazing, rockets firing. They hunted anything that moved. Every road, every supply line, it all became a death trap. The German advantage had literally vanished in a few hours.
What happened on December 23rd wasn't just a turning point on a map. It was a deep, psychological shock. The German soldiers on the ground were forced to face a new and frankly terrifying reality, one that wasn't about courage or tactics anymore. It was about cold, hard, brutal arithmetic.
This quote from General Major Kukat, the German commander right there on the scene, it says everything. After he saw that airlift, he told his interrogators that on that day, every German soldier finally understood the truth. They weren't just fighting another army. They were, in his words, fighting an entire industrial civilization. And by comparison, they felt like they were armed with little more than rifles and horses.
The numbers tell the whole story. Yes, the Americans were outnumbered on the ground, but look at the rest. Over the course of the siege, U.S. delivered more than 1,100 tons of supplies by air. The Germans? 0. The Americans flew over 2,000 missions. The Germans? Less than 100. This wasn't a fight anymore. It was a mathematical certainty.
The end came just 3 days later. On December 26th, General George Patton's Third Army finally broke through the German lines and lifted the siege. And what did they find? They found the 101. Exhausted and worn down, sure, but they were not broken. In fact, thanks to that airlift, they were actually stronger and better supplied than when the whole thing started.
And that brings us to the real lesson of Bastogne. It's so clear. Of course, the bravery of the soldiers on the ground was absolutely essential, but that battle wasn't ultimately won by bravery. It was won by logistics. It was won by the sheer, crushing power of a nation's ability to make something and then deliver it anywhere, at any time.
So let's go back to that one word, nuts. Why did General McAuliffe say it with such confidence? Because deep down, he knew something the Germans couldn't yet comprehend. The 101st Airborne would never truly have to surrender. The ancient rules of siege warfare, starving an enemy out, had just been made obsolete. Their nation could literally reach over the enemy's head and keep them fighting forever, right from the sky.
Those 241 planes, they were the arsenal of democracy, made real, made visible for everyone to see. It was industrial might taking flight. And that leaves us with a pretty big question, doesn't it? In our world, in the 21st century, an age of cyber warfare, of global supply chains, of information itself being a weapon, what does that arsenal look like now? The nature of power is always changing, but the lesson of Bastogne, that the side that can produce and deliver is the side that wins, is more relevant today than ever.